A week later, my partner, Quentin Garrett, and I didn't speak as we left the unmarked car, heading to meet my new vampire contact. Garrett's hands were twitching, as if he couldn't decide what to do with them. We parked on Commerce Street and crossed the road, heading east toward the local underground bloodhouse, where we were supposed to meet my partner's contact, a vampire who claimed to know something about the Sanguinary. At the corner, Garrett stopped and looked me over. I was wearing a thin, dark green sweater over black pants. "Here," he said, tugging at my sweater until it stretched to expose my right shoulder and the ropey remains of an old wound from a vampire arrest gone bad. "It's considered a come-on to show off your scars," he said. I shivered, and not from the cold. With one hand, I checked the placement of my wireless earpiece. "You hear us, Iverson?" I asked quietly. "Loud and clear." The lieutenant's tinny voice echoed in my head. "You need us? Say the word. We're right around the corner." Tonight was only the insert, the setup for what we all hoped would become deep cover. Iverson had played his part a few weeks before by firing me for supposedly screwing up case after case. Pretty much every case I'd touched since I'd agreed to go undercover had turned to shit, all by design. The case screw-ups might have been faked, but I'd been surprised by how real the red in my cheeks had burned as I'd packed a box and left the precinct. Even if many of my coworkers knew what was going on, it was humiliating. The whole thing, my firing, the move to get me connected to the local vamp clan, all of it, was also a rush job. But for all we knew, we might have been playing to an empty house. The Dallas PD didn't necessarily have the vampire admin's full attention. In fact, vampires weren't terribly interested in human laws as far as we could tell, for all that we kept trying to legislate the vamps out of existence. In most states, including Texas, it was technically illegal to be a vampire, feed a vampire, or even associate with vampires. It had been for almost 6 years now. New York had passed the first anti-vamp laws, not long after some vigilante group up there had caught a vampire alive, or undead anyway, and handed it over to a government group to be analyzed. I always imagined that vampire being slowly carved up and dissected, never quite dying. Anyway, it didn't take long for vampires to be labeled a threat on all levels, national, state, and local, though much of California was still holding out as various vampire protection groups tried to have the vamps classified as either people or an endangered species. 3 different levels of anti-vampire task forces led to the usual kinds of interdepartmental squabbles, but it meant there was always someone to call if you had a vampire problem. And having the laws on the books allowed us to create the Paranormal Victims Unit, also known as the Sucker Squads, ostensibly to take down any vampires we ran across. But everyone knew that the Vampire Administration didn't allow the squads anywhere near the important vamps. When it came right down to it, the laws were a convenient fiction designed to make us feel better about the monsters who had invaded our world. The official policy wasn't quite stake on sight, but it wasn't that far off. Vamps didn't have to do much to get offed, though everyone on the squads knew that if we pushed too hard, the vamps would push back. But we kept trying. As Garrett and I headed down the street toward the bloodhouse, my partner pushed his shirt sleeves up until the vampire bite marks on his inner elbows showed clearly, like ammo loaded into a bandolier, marching up his arm and tracing along the blue vein that showed underneath. There were more of them since the last time I'd looked. I wasn't sure how fucked up Garrett really was, or rather, whether or not it mattered that Garrett stayed seriously fucked up, both physically and mentally. But knowing he wasn't 100% made me even more wary than I might have been otherwise. "You good?" he asked, glancing at me out of the corner of his eye. I wanted to make him stop and go over the plan one more time, but really, it was fairly straightforward. "Good enough," I said. "We get in, I pretend to hook up with some cowboy vampire, we get out.